Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Janice Gerbrandt, and I'm here with the Professional Development Virtual Group for PASS. And today we have Michael Johnson going to speak to us today about taking back control of your work using Kanban. I'm just going to run through a couple of PASS slides before he starts. So keep your eye out on what's going on with PASS Summit 2019. Not only has the first wave of general sessions been released, there's also been learning pathways released in the last week, and there's some really interesting collections of sessions that have been announced. Prices increase at the end of this month, so you might want to register soon to save, I think it's about a $400 increase coming up. I think starting tomorrow, there's a PASS marathon about the new world of data privacy. This is only one of the many virtual group webinars that you can attend. You can see coming up, even at the beginning of June, there's another professional development session being held by Blythe Morrow, and the presentation is How to Build a Book of Business for Consultants. You can register at our website. There's lots of virtual groups to cover lots of different topics and even different languages. I encourage you to check them out from time to time and see if there's other virtual groups that you should register for and get notifications of for their webinars. SQL Saturdays are another great event that might be coming to a city near you soon. They happen all over the world, and it's like a mini PASS Summit in a day, usually free to attend. And you should also contact your organizer to see how you can help. As a PASS member, feel free to connect with PASS and other members with Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, especially Twitter. And I am going to pass the screen over to Michael. In the meantime, though, keep in mind if you have any questions, just type them into the question panel, and I will see them and I will pass them along to Michael either during or at the end of the webinar. There you are. I'm going to mute myself, and thank you so much, Michael, for coming to talk to us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Right. Thanks again, Janice. Just to reiterate, essentially today we're going to be speaking about how you can use Kanban to take back control of your work. My name is Michael Johnson, and I tweet at mikejohnson.za. Just a bit of a look at today's agenda. We're going to begin by just a quick introduction to Kanban, sort of look at the history of it. Not too much theory. Then we're going to look at making work visible, which is one of the key elements of Kanban. We try to make our work visible to sort of help guide business as to what's currently being worked on. But any sort of tool is useless without set principles. So Kanban also has those. We'll discuss a few of these. Then we're going to have a look at some of the tools because there's really a couple of options around how you want to implement it. And then finally, we'll have a look at some of the implementation challenges that you might come across when actually looking at implementing a Kanban system. All right, so with that ahead, I'd like to just start with the confession. Firstly, I am not a Kanban expert. Kanban does actually have a certification route around it. I haven't looked at that. I am also not a particularly well-organized person. So the reason I am looking at these sort of work tracking systems is I need something to help me. And I've looked at a sort of number of methods, and I found that Kanban has worked the best. So that's my little disclaimer for my talk. So yeah, let's get to it. I'd like to begin with a sort of definition of a word, and that word is a priority. And this word came into the English language in about the 1400s. And really it means that something is more important than others. So that is that single thing that that takes precedence over others. Now this was all well and good until the sort of mid-1900s, when all of a sudden we got this morphing to the word, or this evolution to it, priorities, which all of a sudden is a bit of a conflict, because how can lots of things become the most important thing? And that's really where we find ourselves in work today, because I don't know how many of you guys, I know it's certainly not me, but I know when I get to the office tomorrow, I'm not 100% sure what the most important thing is. There's already a couple of items in my inbox. I'm sure some user's going to rock up at my desk. There's going to be some new emergency. So we've got this idea of multiple conflicting priorities, and we need some way to manage that. And essentially what we have to help us manage this is we've got a number of frameworks. Now, IT is not a huge trendsetter in this field. We actually lean heavily on other industries, and particularly the manufacturing and especially the motor manufacturing industries. Okay, so in the early sort of 1900s, a guy named Henry Ford came along, and he started a new process on developing vehicles. I'm sure you all are somewhat familiar with this idea of a production line. A production line sort of states that we're going to go and take a job, okay, we're going to break it up into little pieces, and we're going to perform one of these actions on this unit of work, and then we're going to send it down the line to be performed by somebody else, and we've got the sequence of work that gets done. Now, this works fairly well in production lines. Doesn't necessarily work as well when we have sort of more sort of varying items of work. But we also have, within IT, we have our own legacy production system, okay? And this is what we call waterfall. So the waterfall was a big project management sort of framework developed really from about the 70s all the way through to about the mid 2000s. This was the dominant model. Now, swinging back to the production line, Toyota in about the 70s started to figure out that this production line was not optimal. And this new movement came about called lean manufacturing. And lean manufacturing looks to eliminate all of the wasted effort that was in this production line. So we had this new sort of emphasis on eliminating waste as opposed from building this a single track. And we sort of, in IT, we sort of adopted that idea. We got a new framework called Agile. Now, Agile is not a single process. Okay, there are a number of implementations of Agile. The most popular is something called Scrum. I think some of you'll be familiar with those. But for those of you who aren't familiar, essentially what we're doing is we create smaller little micro batches, and we run through these at a faster rate. Another sort of addition of Agile is what's called Kanban. Okay, now Kanban is actually a couple of things. So if we have a look at what is this Kanban, when I ask most people what Kanban is, or when we speak to most people, very quickly they go to stickies. They'll tell you, oh, it's that little thing with the little sticky notes that you put up on the wall. And that isn't wrong, and that's certainly one broad element of Kanban, is this idea of a board. And the board is all about making work visible. Now, Kanban boards are not limited purely to the sort of Kanban process. You'll also find Kanban boards being used in other processes, including Scrum. Okay, so even if you're not using Scrum, you may have actually seen a Kanban. What makes Kanban different from other Agile processes is obviously its methodologies, because we need some control over the way that we do work. And there's a number of rules about what we do, and we'll sort of discuss these as we go through. So the first part of Kanban was that board. And it's all about making work visible. And sort of why we want to make work visible is so that our team, or our extended team, our external stakeholders, know what is happening. Okay, if you think about a very black box and development environment where users don't know what's happening, they tend to get frustrated. By making our work progress sort of open to them, they're more likely to, one, trust us. They're also more likely to sort of bother us less. I think it's very common for most of us to have users at our desks, or perhaps project managers, hey, how is this? When is this going to be due? I need you in this meeting to, so that you can report on some status. And this is all very inefficient, okay? So Kanban boards are all about making work visible. Now, if we go back to basic task management, because that's what any project management system is really about, we think about the simplest task management system, which is without a doubt, the to-do list. Now, the to-do list is a really simple concept. We just take out essentially an A4 piece of paper, and we just start jotting our tasks down. So we'll just task 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, essentially, and they come in chronological order. So that means that we'll essentially write the last task we received as is at the bottom of the board. Now, this doesn't help us tracking any sort of status. So what we need to do, or what we would usually do, is either we scratch them out, or what we do is we create a new column with a little done flag, and then we'll go and put a little tick in items as we've done. So we might complete task 1, and then we complete task 4. So now we have an understanding of roughly what's happening, but it's got a few challenges to this. So let's have a look at what those are. So what it does fairly well is it lets us know, what has been completed. So we can see, with the glance of an eye, I can see what's been done. And I can also, if I sort of go in a very abstract view, I can say, hey, sort of 40% of the work has been done, because 2 out of 4 of the items have been done. But what it doesn't do a good job of tracking is, well, what am I working on right now? Because when I look at this list, well, I don't know. Just because these items were added in that sort of chronological order, that doesn't mean that that is the priority of the items. So to-do lists don't necessarily adjust well. Now, fine, we could create our to-do list in something like Excel, and then we could create a new priority column, and we could sort that way, and that's fine too. But in general, to-do lists just lack a means of tracking what is being worked on right now and what is the most important. Okay, so that is what we will be working on next. So how does Kanban take this and make work visible? Okay, so for those of you who don't know what a Kanban board is, essentially we just start off with a big board, and we have columns. And in each one of those columns, we give it a name, and that name relates to the status. So if we think back to our to-do list, well, we've got a to-do column and a done column. And in our to-do column, well, we'll put the tasks that we haven't completed. And in our done column, we're going to put our tasks that have been completed. So that sort of ties off to what we had inside of the to-do list. So again, well, we can see what has been completed, but we still have no insight as to what is actually being worked on right now. But because we're working with stickies, we have this ability to reorganize these stickies pretty easily, but moving the most important item up to the top, which means that it is possible to begin answering questions, well, what will be worked on next is pretty easy, because I can see that, well, the next items I'm going to be working on is item 3, then item 2, then item 5. So how we're going to deliver our work is pretty easy, but there's still that big nagging question of, well, what am I working on right now? And this is not a difficult problem. All we're going to do is we're going to introduce a brand new column, and we're going to call that column doing, okay? Now, obviously, you might use different wording for these columns, but essentially a to-do, doing, done column is a common and complete enough pattern for simple task management. So if for the kind of things that you do at home, if you're not doing particularly complex things at work, working in large teams, perhaps to-do, doing, done works for you there too. So we'll take these items from our to-do column. We can then move them into the doing column. Once they're complete, we can then move them into the done column. And we get this nice little flow of work from the left to the right until we've finished work. Now that's great in a very theoretical world, but most of us don't live there. Okay, what tends to be the case is, well, we'll kick off a project. We're going to begin our start. We're going to start our first task. Then our manager walks in and he says, no, actually, there's this thing that's more important. I need you to deliver that too. All right. And then his manager walks in, as well as his manager, and he'll say, actually, we've got 2 new items that you need to do. So very quickly, well, we've got 2 more items. We've got 4 in total, and another user, and we end up with a whole bunch of tasks all in the doing column. And at this point, work is no longer visible, because although we have a nice, pretty board, I cannot look at this board at any time and say, this is how far I am with any of these tasks. I also cannot tell you which one of these I'm really working on, because we know that we're not actually working on all of them at the same time. So this has a lot of challenges, and this is why the principles of Kanban are sort of so important. So the principles of Kanban are pretty flexible. Kanban is not a rigid project management system. It doesn't have the rigidity of a sort of a Scrum. We don't have the processes and the roles. We don't have those processes and roles that we have in Waterfall. It's a fairly flexible system, okay? And if you want to have a look at how some of that might work, let's begin by looking at the processes. So Kanban is what we might call bring your own process. What we mean by that is, well, we want people to be able to take their existing processes as they are at work and actually be able to fit that into the current system that they're using. And this is pretty important for adoption. If we look at how many people sort of embrace something like a Kanban, and they go all in, and they get burnt very quickly because the processes in Kanban are so different and it's so rigid to the way that they're used to working. And again, if you go in full in on Scrum, Scrum can be a very unforgiving environment where you start doing things like getting estimates wrong. In the worst case scenarios, if you get your estimate wrong, you actually have to throw all the work that you've just completed back in the to-do column and start again. Okay, now that's a very rigid way, but Kanban doesn't do that. So just to show you kind of how flexible it is, we've got a couple of scenarios. Now, I'm going to start off with a very basic task tracking system. This is the one we've looked at so far. This is where we start from the to-do list. I see I didn't rename my columns. Okay, bad me. So we have a to-do, we have our doing, and we have our done. Okay, and those three sort of phases are really good enough for tracking simple tasks. But we know as developers, I'm assuming most of us come from a development background. But again, Kanban is not IT specific. Kanban has actually been picked up in the advertising industry, surprisingly enough, with sort of great effect. So it lends itself to very creative work as well. Okay, so if we're going to look at a development environment, we often change the name of the to-do list to the backlog. And the backlog is full of things that we call features. So these are things our users want. We'll then go through a process of breaking those features down into tasks, and then we'll move those tasks through our system. So we'll have a backlog, then we'll have an evaluation phase. This is where we would break those tasks down. It would consist of team members such as architects and business analysts. The next phase would be the development phase. So this is where developers actually implement the code. Once we have developed, we then go into a testing phase. And then once we've done testing, well, then we're going to say we're done. Now, Kanban plays very well with another process called DevOps. And DevOps looks to sort of unify the development and the operations teams into a single team. So your done no longer exists at the code's done. Is it in production and is it working? So again, we could extend that system even further by having a backlog. We could have an evaluate phase and an implement phase, the testing phase. Then we could go directly into QA, into production, and then into some sort of stabilization, just monitoring phase, where essentially things are just monitored slowly. So you can see that we don't have to be all that rigid about the processes we have. The process that you have is what you want to start with. Don't make your life too complex by trying to change too much at one time. And this works very well because even guys coming from Waterfall understand this very simply. They understand, even Waterfall has design, build, test, production phases. This is what in IT, we're just used to it. So if we're talking about comparing these things, the next thing we might want to look at is roles. Okay, now Kanban again is a very flexible system. Waterfall has a project manager. Scrum has a sort of Scrum Master. It has a product owner. You don't have that in Kanban. Generally, there are no formal roles in Kanban. One of the disciplines we do have that we share with something like Scrum is that we want to hold daily stand-ups. And the biggest role is probably just who leads that Kanban system. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't going to be a hierarchy in your system. There will be people whose opinions matter more than others. These are the people who will essentially drive the priority of the tasks And those could be both internal and external stakeholders, and they may or may not be on the team. We also don't have, or we're not required to have only a single product owner, okay, per team. We can have many product owners, which really means that teams can be multi-product or multi-channel, if you will, and can sort of very easily move items through the system with multiple product owners. So we've got this idea of a moving work from left to right, and we know that, or at least I'm suggesting to you right now, that Kanban is going to make this better. But how do we know that something is better? And the only way we can do that is by measuring throughput. So how do we measure throughput? And in order to do that, we need to understand a couple of concepts within any sort of project date. If we have a continuum, well, the very first event that takes place is how much work gets assigned to us. Okay, so that is when we are formally asked by a client or one of our internal stakeholders to deliver a piece of work. Okay, the next phase is, well, that's when the item is actually started, because we know that those two are inherently different. And then finally, there's the point at which it's completed. Now, the first measure we have is what we call cycle time. So cycle time refers to the time from when I started doing the task till the time I completed it. Now, if I had a simple task that said, I think it's going to take me about 48 hours, so that's 6 days at 8 hours a day. So when my manager comes in and asks me how long do I think I'm going to take, well, often I'll say it'll take me 6 days. Okay, now what your manager actually hears is he says to himself, well, you know what, today's Wednesday, 6 days from now is next Thursday, so that is when I can expect the work. Now, that's not what you said. You just said it's 6 days of work. Now, what he heard is the lead time. So that is the time that when he assigned it to you till the time you can complete it. And this is probably one of the stickiest items between developers and their sort of stakeholders, is that when we give estimates, it's often the cycle time. They're hearing lead time, and then we often get the complaint that IT is often under-delivering, because they just didn't factor in that we had other items to do. Now, there's a final measure that we often want to have a look at, and that's just throughput. So the throughput is how quickly or how many units of work we can move from one side to the other. Now, this is where things might get a little bit more interesting. The idea of estimates has always been very difficult within IT, because any estimate is essentially a guess. When we begin a task, if we've done it before, our guess is probably better than if it's completely something new, but we often get this wrong. There's actually a nice little movement by a guy named Woody Zuhl, who he calls it the no estimates movement. He doesn't like being credited with this thing, but essentially he's saying that we spend so much time trying to estimate work well that, one, it's almost an impossible job anyway, so why put in that effort? Okay, so essentially what we want to do in Kanban is use small estimates. And something that works really well and a process advocated by a guy named Eric Brenner is to actually try and break our work down into items that are about 3 days long. Okay, so any feature that we get, we know when we get a feature, it might consist out of several days worth of work. But we want to kind of, in our breakdown step, okay, or in our evaluation phase, try to create little chunks of work that we know that we can do in 3 days. And this kind of allows us to get a nice throughput in our flow. We'll have a look at how that works in a sec, but if we've got these somewhat standardized units of work, then our flow is a lot better. Now, it's absolutely okay that we don't get the spot on every time, because sometimes we're going to be over, sometimes we're going to be under. Now, we're going to get this nice, hopefully a nice normal curve, okay, and essentially that's all going to average out in the end, and we'll get that average throughput of 3 things a day. Okay, now the way we want to enable work to flow through our system is what we call WIP limits. Now, WIP limits are one of the sort of more nuanced sort of things about Kanban, and there's often it seems very counterintuitive to somebody say, I'm going to take on less work so that I can deliver something. Because that often says, now, because I'm doing less work, I'm going to deliver more. What we're really saying is, well, actually, I'm just going to focus on less so that I can get the work that I'm actively working with done. Let's have a look at why that really works. So why do we take on too much work? And there's really a number of reasons for that. Okay, the first one is external demands. So if your manager assigns more work to you, well, as a junior sort of developer, you don't have a choice. You're just going to take that. As you grow more senior, you might have an ability to push back, but generally you are a consumer of work, and work is pushed at you. Often we take on work to be a team player. Some teams we just get that guy. He's taking on more work than he can handle, and everybody else in the business wants to know why we can't be more like Greg. Okay. We also get poor estimates. Sometimes we said we were going to do a unit of work. We thought it was going to take us a couple of days. A month later, we're still busy with it, but we had other commitments. Okay, so we still have to honor the previous commitment, but we're still busy with the last project. Okay, and then finally, on the softer side, we like to please people. So when sort of Marion accounts come by us and ask us for that teeny favor, we're often more accommodating to that, and because we don't want to say no to people, people are essentially we're sort of social beings, and we just take on more work than perhaps we shouldn't. So let's have a look at how accepting work and how we deliver work might impact us. I've got a simple scenario where I have 3 features that I would like to deliver. Each one of those 3 features can be broken down into 3 tasks. So task 1, task 2, and task 3. And because we're database people, maybe we'll say, task 1 is building tables, task 2 is loading data, and task 3 is building reports. Okay, I'm a BI guy. All right, so we've got these 3 tasks, and how could we deliver them? Well, the first way we can deliver these tasks is I can do all of task 1 type first. So it makes sense to me, while I've got Management Studio open, I may as well build all the tables for features 1, 2, and 3. Okay, and that sounds pretty reasonable because I've got this efficiency that I might get. And then I'm going to go to my ETL tool, and I'm going to do those, and then I'm going to go to my reporting tool to deliver the final 3 tasks. Now, if we look at this, we start looking at some of those measures we spoke about earlier. So if we look at the lead time on feature 7, I'm just going to have a little laser pointer here. Yeah. So essentially, if we were going to start with feature 1, feature 1 is made out of task 1, 2, and 3. We can see on day 1, again, I'm assuming I can deliver each one of these tasks in 1 day. I would essentially deliver, feature 1 would only be delivered after 7 days. Okay. Now, why is this important? Well, if I was also told by my business that for every day that this feature is out in the market, that is an additional $1,000 of revenue that we'll get. So if it takes me 7 days to get something out to market, well, then I get a revenue of $2,000 because for feature 1, I have days 8 and 9 in which I get to derive a revenue. For feature 2, our lead time is 8 days. Okay, starting from day 1, it's only delivered on day 8. Again, I see my cycle time is 7. My revenue is only 1 because I'm only earning revenue from that day 9. And then finally for feature 3, my lead time is 9 because I need to deliver it on the 9th day. Again, my cycle time is 7 and I have no revenue. Okay, now that is the first way of approaching the work. The second way is to actually deliver this work 1 feature at a time. And that would look something like this. So I'm going to begin feature 1. I'm going to build the tables. I'm going to load the data. And I'm going to build the report. Okay, and then I'm going to get it to market. Now we're assuming we can get it to market that quickly. But if we're a good DevOps shop, then perhaps that is feasible. Now, very quickly, we're going to go back to those same measures that we were looking at earlier. And for here, you can see that our feature 1, our lead time has reduced because now I got to deliver my product after 3 days. My cycle time is 3 days because it only took me 3 days to develop the product. And if I were to derive $1,000 a day, I would have $6,000 or 6 units of revenue from that product per day. Same goes for feature 2 and feature 3. So if we're going to compare these two approaches, okay, we can see that I have the first approach, my sort of minimum lead time is 7 days, my maximum is 9. Now in the second approach, my maximum lead time is also 9, but I also have a lead time of 3. So that's a much faster delivery cadence for the very first task. Cycle time, now sure, your customer doesn't really see that, but what he does feel is he looks at that revenue. He says, hey, you know, the faster you can get this into production, the faster we can deliver value. Okay. Now there's a couple of other nice features. You know, so what happens if we were to lose the last 3 days? Okay, so if I'm just going to shoot back to this approach. If I were going to lose these 3 days over here, and like that, essentially what happens is I lost them for whatever reason. You know, maybe my employees were sick, maybe the holiday season, maybe there was another project that came in. But if I were to lose 3 days in this fictitious scenario, I wouldn't have delivered a single product. But in my within this approach, had I lost the last 3 days, I would have delivered 2 out of 3 products, which is pretty good. All right, not ideal, but still pretty good. Okay, so that's why we want to start sort of reducing our WIP. Now, so my slide's just gone a bit funny there. I don't know what's happened. Okay. So it's, oh my god. Sorry, Excel's not behaving on me. Okay, there we go. No, discard. Apologies, guys. For some reason, my slides just be with you in a sec. Okay, so we were speaking about WIP limits and why we wanted them. And what we're going to do in a WIP limit is we sort of said that having less work in the system is beneficial. Okay, so one, because it reduced the risk that we had. Okay, but also because when we work on multiple tasks, we lose time when we do that context switch. There were some estimates that every time we perform a context switch, we lose about 20 minutes of focus while switching from the first to the second task. What this means is if we are juggling between 3 different, if we're doing that context switch 3 times a day, we're essentially losing 1 hour of every day in work. So that's sort of not desirable. So we're going to create these things called WIP limits. And what WIP limits are is a limit to the amount of work that we can have in any phase at any given time. And these can be demonstrated visually in a number of ways. One of the more common ways is to simply have a large number with the number of items that can be implemented in any WIP, or within any lane at a time. So this means that in the prepare phase, I can only have 2 items at any given time. In the implement phase, I can have 3. Feedback, I can have 2. And of course, it doesn't make sense to have WIP limits on our backlog and done, because these are essentially inactive statuses that nobody's actively working on. Okay, so how might this look? So if we think about, we've got our backlog, we've got 4 items. I'm going to start bringing on, I can see in the prepare phase, I have a WIP limit of 2. So I'm going to bring in my first item. Okay, that's great, and I start actioning it. And then I'm going to sort of bring on another item, because often we don't want to work on 1 item at a time. But now a third sort of critical issue has come in, so we need to cater for this. So we're going to start bringing it in. But very quickly, or depending on the system, we want to get a sort of highlight that says, you know what, there's too much work currently going on within this stream. Okay, now we don't want to support the system, okay, because this causes problems. When somebody's got too much work to do, the last thing we should be doing is giving them more work. Okay, they can't get their head out of water to deal with the issue. Okay, so instead what we another principle that Kanban embraces is this idea of using a pull system. as opposed from a push system. So in a push system, essentially when I'm done with the task, I give it to the person who's downstream, and it is now their responsibility. So, sorry, there's something wrong with my slides. Okay, so now we've got our pull system, and it might look like something like this. So we've got again, we've got our 4 tasks. We might bring item 1 in. We're going to sort of bring in item 2, okay? Then we've got item 3. So we can see these items sort of starting to work through the system, and then we hit our sort of deadlock. So we don't want to cater for a scenario in which one system gets overwhelmed. So instead what we do is we actually introduce a mini Kanban inside of each stream. It's very simple. All we're looking for is a doing and a done system. Okay. So again, we've got our 2 items. Now our board might look something like this. Now the way a Kanban or the pull system will work is when if I am at let's say I'm in the implementation phase, when I'm looking to get new work, I'm going to pull work from the prepare phase, okay? So that means that the people in the prepare phase do not push work into the implementation phase, rather the implementation phase pulls that work down. So once the prepare phase is done, you can see that he has 2 tasks. He's also got a WIP limit of 2. So his 2 tasks are now done, and he wants to accept more work. But the problem is that he can't pull another item off the backlog, okay? Because this backlog is saying that if you accept another item off the back limit, you're going to be in violation of that WIP limit. So we don't allow you to actually pull a new item off the backlog. And what does this mean? Because essentially the prepare phase or the team that's responsible for the prepare phase can't actually do any work. Okay, so can't we just throw work at the implement phase and get more work? And we don't want to do this because chances, because our implementation team are not getting through the work they want, we need another way of doing this, okay? And because they can't pull, we essentially have this the state where the prepare team needs to help, okay? And we call this swarming, okay? So within the swarming phase, what we want is, we want the people who have time, okay? So in this example, the people who have time are the people who are working in the prepare team. They physically have no work that they can do. They have time to look at how to unlock the process. The implementation team just don't have that time available because they're already behind. Okay, so this idea of swarming, it comes from that Toyota Carter. So when Toyota did the system, essentially what they did is they implemented a number of bells throughout the system. And anytime you got to a state where you couldn't work, they would pull on this cord and the whole factory floor would come to an end or come to a standstill. And everybody would have to swarm around this issue and they would debate the problem and very quickly find a solution, okay? So instead of waiting for a retrospective at the end of the month or at the end of the project, no, they would deal with the issue right there and then. So how would they deal? And maybe that would be perhaps the work that the information team needs to be fixed. Perhaps they need more resources. So maybe we might assign somebody from the implementation team to the developer team. There is no answer to this. Obviously, each case is unique, but we sort of need to understand that. So we've got this idea of swarming where when the flow stops, the team comes together to get flow going again. Now, another important element within our Kanban is that we try not to allow work to come back, okay? So we don't allow work to go from the development phase back into the implementation phase. And this often happens within sort of task-based systems when work hasn't been completed to sort of the best standards. Okay, so another key concept that we have is this idea of the definition of done. And the definition of done really means that we need to understand all the things that need to be done before we're allowed to move an item from our doing column into our done column. Now, if we think about the development team, Such items might include things like checking code into source control, running the unit tests, running integration tests. They might have to produce some amount of documentation, and perform all of these steps that allow us to be sure that the work that they push downstream is not going to come back, okay? Because we don't want work to ever flow from right to left, okay? It has to flow from left to right. So in order to do that, we also have this notion called, or this idea of continuous improvement, okay? So like we saw swarming, we wanted to solve problems right there. We're also going to have a periodic work items moving through our system that are devoted to continuous improvement. So these might be things like a new testing framework. So this will actually be one of the tasks on our backlog. Okay, it'll then enter our system. Each team will have the ability to actually, because it essentially what it's doing is it's block booking time for them within our stream for them to actually improve, and that improvement step will move through the system, and hopefully all three of our streams will be in a better state once each one of them have been given time to improve how they do work. Okay, Janice, I don't know if there's any questions. I'm thinking about it because we're going to go have a look at tools next. So maybe answer any questions if there are any.
No questions right now.
All right, that makes it easy. No problem. Okay, so if we're going to have a look at tools, okay. Now there's a couple of tools that are available, and they fall into two broad categories. So the first one is the thing that we're probably pretty familiar with, which is the physical Kanban board. So this is something you often put a whiteboard with little sticky notes up in your office. And the second one is a digital implementation. So there are a number of products, and we'll have a look at two of them in a second. But the choice really begins with physical versus digital. Now, when you're starting out, and if you're a small team, it's recommended that you start with a physical board. Okay, because digital boards are sort of harder to play around with in the beginning. When I want to sort of adapt, I want to try new things. Digital frameworks often require me to do a lot of setup, and I want to avoid all of that. It's also very handy having a very tangible thing in front of you. If everybody in the team can see it, it becomes very easy to hold everybody accountable because it's always in front of you. Digital ones, sure, we often find them projected on screens in the background, but they're often very easy to ignore. Okay, now you put the Kanban there. If you put it in the coffee area or maybe by the front door, it's sort of unavoidable. Okay, so if we have a look at the online options, there's a couple of options that you can look at, and one of the ones that sort of you might want to look at first is a great tool called Trello. So Trello is a product that's free to use, and it's really quick to get going. So if we were to go and create a Kanban board, I could just say, well, go and create me a new Kanban board. I'm going to call it demo. Very quickly, a new little type comes up. I'm going to very quickly create my task. So I can say doing, done. Okay, so now I've got a very basic workflow. Obviously, I can add another one. Testing, again, I can sort of adapt that process pretty easy. And when I want to create cards, that's as easy as adding a new item. So maybe submit a new talk, and I can book a new holiday. So whatever it is that you want to do, you can kind of go and add these items, and you can rearrange them. Okay, so we spoke about using the order in the columns to denote priority. We can also go and edit these items, so we can go and give them descriptions. But also what I like to do is using the members option, we can actually go and assign items to different members. Okay, and we can also use these little labels over here to denote categories of work. Okay, now I often use these. I've got some of my clients, I have multiple client types. So I'll have, this is my perhaps my business users, these might be my IT users. I might use red for something like a critical issue. So you can use these to kind of help you along, sort of give you that additional metadata onto your tasks. So very easy. Again, we can move our item through the doing, testing, done, and you'll notice Trello actually does build up a nice little backlog. You can export that out to a JSON file, and if you can essentially manipulate that document, it gives you some nice feedback where you can go and actually start calculating things like throughput. Okay, so that's a fairly handy tool, but very simple. What it doesn't allow you to do is support any notion of WIP limits. Okay, so we can't create limits on these columns as to how much work there is. We also can't create those sub-columns that we saw. So it's great for personal use, I find, perhaps less so within the corporate space. So when we're thinking corporate, well, Microsoft's new portal is it's a new Azure DevOps portal. And that's where they want you to be doing a lot of your work. Now, Azure DevOps incorporates that whole project lifecycle. So it includes source control, build automation, testing, but it also has a section for boards. Okay, so the first item within the boards is simple work items themselves. So you can almost think of this as the to-do list that we saw earlier. Okay, but again, we know that visual items are better, so we can visualize that same board just by viewing the boards option here, and we can see our items are created. Now here you can see that I had a WIP limit of 5. You can see it's automatically calculating the one item, so I know how many items are on WIP. It's also possible for you to actually create the little swim lanes within each active, the sort of doing and done columns, which allow you to sort of implement that pull system properly. Now, because this is not strictly a Kanban product, it also supports a Scrum. You'll also see things like burn down charts and sprints. Okay, so so you're not restricted to just Kanban using the Azure DevOps Kanban boards. So that's a look at sort of 2 of the tools, but there really are there's a lot of them. I used to use one called AccessSoft. I actually found that to be pretty good. So I would recommend that to anybody. But yeah, as always, just go Google, and you'll sort of find many options. If we have a look at some of the challenges with moving to Kanban, one of the things I find is it really doesn't deal well with small repetitive tasks. So what you don't want to be doing is moving an item that takes 5 minutes to do. Don't create a Kanban ticket for it and move it through the stream. That's ultimately more admin than the task itself. So we want to look at building groups of tasks that take at least a day. Okay, there's absolutely no reason that you don't want to do these multiple tasks. So I'm not saying don't do them, but perhaps what you might do is you might say, you know what, for 2 hours a day, I deal with small inconsequential tasks. Mary in accounting has a query. Somebody asks you to look at this. You're quickly going to go and research this method. You don't have to create tasks for all of those little things. Set aside some time for that, and then set aside the bulk of your time to deal with items in the Kanban system. And again, only work with the items that have been assigned to you. When you move to a Kanban system, there will be a temporary dip in performance. And that's not just true of Kanban, that's true of everything. So even those people who might move from waterfall, you might see a temporary dip in performance as everybody kind of gets used to it. Some of the people who perhaps aren't that keen on change might use this as an argument. So set the expectation at first to say, for the first 2 months, it is likely that there will be a reduced performance. But if it's known and you can show how that is getting better, then often we can justify that. Limiting WIP seems very counterintuitive, especially to business users. When your boss has the sort of feeling that you're not delivering much, you telling him that I need less work on my plate, or I'm only going to be busy with, is less, is going to invoke or may invoke a negative reaction out of him. It's pretty important to perhaps run through scenarios and show him how working on a single task at a time works. Okay. And then there's always going to be just something we sort of need to realize, that there's always going to be more demand than capacity. That is just the nature of sort of any any sort of business in the world today. So our work tends not to be finished, okay? And Kanban tends to deal with arrival of new work very well. Because we've just got this backlog, we don't have a set number of sprints, we don't have a sort of project due date, okay? We just deliver constantly. And once business sort of know that you're going to meet these targets reliably, they are going to challenge you less often, okay? And they're going to sort of fall in line with the system fairly quickly. Now, obviously, I've just said that, and I know that perhaps that doesn't sort of hold much water. So I'm going to sort of refer you to 3 books. So the first book is a book called The Phoenix Project. Okay, it's become a very popular book recently. The Phoenix Project is essentially a book that's written as a fictional style character who takes over an IT department, and this IT department is an absolute gridlock. And he looks at a number of processes about how to start unlocking that business value. And a big part of that was Kanban and the addition of DevOps. So that's a great read to try and get the why. It doesn't deal much with the why, the how, but it does a great job of, sort of why. The next book you might want to look at is Making Work Visible. So Dominica does a great job of showing you how you can build up these different Kanban systems, how you can build those flexibility, you can build special swim lanes for priority items, how to deal with all of these business concerns that you might come across. And then the final book is Agile Project Management with Kanban, written by a guy named Eric Brechner. And Eric actually runs the Xbox team for Microsoft. So he obviously has a couple of hundred developers in his team. So he has real world experience. And what is really nice in this book is he's got specific sections about migrating to Kanban from waterfall, migrating to Kanban from Agile, or from Scrum. So he looks at those migrations very specifically, and also has a very nice Q&A section, to how to answer some of these questions that team members are going to sort of raise as possible impediments. So I would recommend those 3 books, certainly as a starting point. Again, there is an actual Kanban certification. I can't tell you too much about it, unfortunately, but these 3 books are a great way to get started. So if we have any questions, I think I'm happy to take them. You there, Janice?
None yet.
None.
Well,
right.
I guess except for me, I was looking at the Azure
the
Azure DevOps boards. Do you need to be using all the rest of the Azure DevOps features to get much out of that?
No, you can use the boards as they are. Obviously, it fits in very nicely because we can attribute things like our tickets into our source control. So then we've actually got commits at the various stages as I work. So now I find that's one of the things I found actually quite nice when I broke my work down, is that I found tickets very easily linkable to my source control check-in. Now I use SVN at work, so it doesn't have a great check-in, not like DevOps does. And I use Trello, and Trello doesn't have any sort of integration there, but it became very easy to sort of tie those 2 processes off. So yes, there's definitely, there's no need to use the entire system, but it's probably something you want to look at, at least around the repos.
Okay. I've been using Microsoft Planner a little bit. It's I think it's good for up to small, medium-sized projects. I think when you get bigger, it starts to maybe not support.
Is Planner a Kanban system?
Kind of. Used it, so. It can be. Yeah. Let's see. I have a question here. So I have a question. Can we see the DevOps version of the sample board he showed under the processes heading again?
Sorry?
He showed tasks, development, and then DevOps.
Okay. All right. I think this was in the slide deck. Let me just go to, I think this is what he was talking about. So obviously, DevOps doesn't have a set workflow. Again, sorry, this is an absolute nightmare with the, sorry, go away. So now I just sort of made these up as the stages that you might have, but typically we have a development phase. So we'd have a sort of a backlog. Okay, backlogs are not common, they're not just common to Kanban. We use backlogs inside of Scrum as well. Then we've got the evaluation phase, and that could be, often called the planning phase. Then we have the implement or development phase. Then you have a testing, testing phase. And you know what? Testing in a true DevOps environment is actually, it's highly automated. So it should almost occupy none of your time. Okay. But obviously, in most development environments, we can't automate everything. So there will still be some degree of testing. Then we'd want to push that out to a Q&A. So DevOps embraces this notion of continuous delivery. So the idea is, I as a developer should be able to build a unit of, build a feature, check it into source control. That would go through a number of automated tests to sort of get some sort of assurance that it's not going to break my product. And that should push directly through into a production-like environment. Now, that's probably not your production environment, but QA should be a production-like environment. So new features should just be arriving in our QA environment daily, and that's where users can go and test that. So we don't need to do a sort of retrospective like we used to do in Scrum, where we got the product owner in and we showed them the features. We could essentially just push these features into QA continuously, and they can evaluate them there and provide feedback, immediately. Instead of waiting for the end of the month to learn that we've done something wrong. It's really handy to learn that sort of today. Okay, that makes sense. I
think so. Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Yes. So, yeah. George says yes.
Cool. Okay. Okay. So, but DevOps is, so DevOps is a new and exciting field. Again, it doesn't have the rigidity of other sort of processes. But the Phoenix project is a great place to begin. They have a follow-up book that actually looks at the actual implementation of how you do these things. But again, even at that level, they never prescribe the steps that you would go through. But again, a lot of this should be ultimately automated. All right. So if there's no other questions, I'm going to say thank you very much. If anybody would like to sort of reach out, I did have my Twitter handle. So it's Mike Johnson ZA. Sort of feel free to reach out and ask for any questions. And I think this video will be available online at some point.
It will be, yeah. I'll post it on the past Prof Dev Twitter when it gets posted.
I'll try to check on that video every now and then. So if you want to post video questions there too, then I can pick them up there too. All right. Thanks. With that, I'll hand over to you then, Jones.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Michael. That was really interesting. I've played around with using Kanban, but not really looked into any of the real theory behind it. Just needs to do, doing, and done. That was as far as I got, and that
often that's
for
enough.
myself.
If it's for your personal life, that is more than enough. Try to keep things. KISS always applies. Keep it simple, stupid. Don't over-engineer a problem.
Yeah, I think it gets tricky when you start involving more than one or two or three people, and so I was very interested in your presentation.
It definitely works with multiple people. Where it becomes a bit interesting is when you have multiple teams, and often the solution is that each team should just have its own Kanban board instead of trying to sort of craft some sort of thing that meets everybody. But again, it has worked. I think the largest team I've ever heard of supports 70 people. So it does scale.
That's great. Good. Well, thanks so much. And thanks everybody for tuning in. And I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their day.
Thanks, guys.